A gangland murder in Belfast of the underworld's most wanted man. Hitman Robbie Lawler had countless enemies, but who ordered his death? This month, Crime World presents Double Cross, the murder of Robbie Lawler, a podcast series that will bring you right into the black heart of organised crime. Based on my new book, Web of Betrayal, we'll follow a bloody trail into the underworld and to the narco-style murder and dismemberment of teenager Cian Mulready Woods, which would set in motion the complex plot to take out Lawler. Listen as we lift the lid on the inner workings of Ireland's gangland, revealing a cast of ruthless characters who take centre stage for their place in this real-life double-cross thriller. Crime World presents Double Cross, coming soon to all podcast platforms. Web of Betrayal by me, Nicola Talent, is now available on Audible and in all good bookstores. So, Niall, I asked and he came.
He did. He absolutely did. And I mean, it's blown up on social media anyway.
So, Gerry The Monk Hutch, obviously we're talking about, who decided to do, I suppose, well, look, he does what he wants, but it is a very in-depth interview covering a wide range of topics and really covering, I suppose, what's happened to him in his life and what's happened within his life over the past number of years, and bringing him through that. And he was very forthcoming. I was a little bit surprised that he was open to talking about stuff that wasn't necessarily just around his election bid. He's actually a or atypical politician from that point of view.
Yeah, I think often when we have spoken to people involved who've been involved in criminality, they've been very reluctant to speak about other names, if you want. Obviously, Gerry Hutch does speak directly about the Kinahan feud, and I suppose that's surprising. Now he speaks from his own perspective, but he's open, I suppose, about some of the feelings he had about what was going on. Obviously, his family suffered a huge number of losses in the middle of all that violence. So yeah, it was like he's an engaging person. People are going to listen to it and have an opinion on it. And that's 100% their right.
And I think really, sort of there's two elements of this. There's the political element and there's the crime element. And, maybe that's why Crime World was the place that he felt he should come to do this interview. But I think that the crime element of it, of his life, of what's happened, of what's gone on, of what he's been involved in, it is quite extraordinary and unique to get from the horse's mouth what it was like. We as journalists have spoken about this story. We have been over and back on it. Nothing ever beats the personal experience. And when somebody is speaking about their own personal experience, of course, he's coming from his perspective.
Yeah.
He was never asked to try and take a broader or to step back and look at it. We wanted it from his perspective. We wanted him to tell it like how it was for him. And that's what he's done in a very articulate way. What did you think of him?
I think he's got a bit of shyness to him, actually, which I thought is unusual because I suppose because of his persona and the fact that he has, a person of whatever way you look at him, he's a person of sort of note. So I think there is a bit of shyness to him. There's certainly the self-depreciation is something that's very strong in him.
He's sort of humble.
Well, he certainly is.
He comes across as humble, doesn't he?
Well, he's certainly self-depreciating and is willing to poke fun at himself, I suppose, on a personal level when you're talking to him, just even before, while the cameras aren't rolling. The other thing is, I suppose, you see a side to somebody like that. You don't see all sides, but you certainly, not really what I would have expected, I suppose.
I think it's going to be really interesting for people to hear Gerry Hutch speak, to see him speak, because he has never given an interview like this before. ever in his entire career, if you'd call it, or his life. He was and has been questioned in the past about his involvement in criminality, about his involvement in, his suspected involvement in armed robberies and in various other things. And of course, we have put these things to him as you do have to as a journalist. But I think this sort of podcast for him, and maybe that's why he chose to come in, is a place where people have time to express themselves. They're not being asked a question and asked to answer it. They have time to contemplate. They have time to maybe go into a little background before they answer a question, because, of course, in the world of journalism, radio and all the rest of it, you're asked a question, you've got a certain amount of minutes to answer it. And it's very difficult sometimes to get out what you mean or what you are. Whereas the podcast forum is, we have done the interview. We believe it is very long. Everybody was exhausted at the end of it. And as usual with a podcast, you let it run until it's come to its natural end. And then you look at it and go, how long is this? What are we going to do with it? And that's why we've decided to break it into 3 parts, into 3 specific areas that we spoke about. But he will never have been seen by the general public like this. Relaxed, talking about himself, talking about his personal life, talking about what he likes to do, talking about the feud, talking about his political aspirations and everything in between, including his childhood and how he first came into contact with the criminal justice system and all the rest of it. It's a unique thing he did. Now, there will be criticism. There's absolutely no question about that. And, we will get criticised for everything we do. And there you go.
I mean, I think you see, I suppose criminality is a feature of society. And hearing Gerry Hutch speak about those issues, he gives it the context of his life. How he became involved in criminality, what that was like for him personally. So it gives that context. I suppose, why are people interested in hearing about crime at all, I suppose, is the question. And I suppose there's a morality aspect to that. People want to hear about people living outside the normal regulations and they want to have a view on it. So there will be criticism. We've criticised people in the past for what they say, criminals, what they say. But I think it's hugely interesting. And he
has no problem with being, questioned about, I suppose as journalists, you can't just, it's easy to forget when you're doing a lengthy interview that you have to put this to him, you have to put this to him, which we did all the way through it.
Yeah.
But he didn't mind. It didn't put him off. He didn't get up. He didn't storm out. He didn't do a John Waters on it or whatever else. He took the questions and he answered them. Some of them in a kind of a, smart arsey way. Fair enough.
Well, he didn't. I suppose
some of them he answered them in a very constructive way. Some of them he maybe didn't answer. He might have shaken his head or something like that and moved the conversation on. But he didn't kind of shy away from questions. He didn't shy away from. I was surprised that he didn't shy away from almost anything except one area that people who listen will hear about. And I think I understood in that moment that, this was too personal.
Yeah.
And we all have, a wall that we have to put up around us, maybe, especially when we're speaking in public. There's always areas that you won't go. And that was his.
Yeah, look, he certainly, he answered every question. There's obviously parts of his life involving the suspicion of his involvement in armed robberies that's well ventilated and people are going to have a view. We all have our own view. But I suppose that it's really interesting to see how he views it and how that life came about. And I think you do get a sense of that.
I got a load of contacts, I'm sure you did, yeah. I got one email from somebody who said to me that they recall that after the the Regency trial when he was found not guilty, and he was about to walk out the door, and I had actually spoken to him in the forecourts there in the Central Criminal Court, in the foyer, the public area, and I'd had a brief conversation with him at the time, and somebody, I must have been doing an interview, maybe it was on here, I can't remember, but I said that he wasn't somebody I was afraid of. He's not a fearful character. He's not somebody that you're afraid standing in his presence. There is a certain warmth and charm to him. There's undoubtedly that. I think that will come across in the interview. I think those who know him know that side of Gerry Hutch. They probably know other sides of him as well, but they do know that charming, sort of funny, ordinary guy side of him. The general public don't know that. And I think Gerry Hutch, the whole idea of him, the name of him, the headlines around him, everything have created this. People would be fearful. When they see him talking, I think they'll realise that, there's plenty of sides to Gerry Hutch.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, there could be another side to Gerry Hutch. I mean, we don't say that. That there's undoubtedly a charming side and an engaging side, and the reason Gerry Hutch is, at one point he speaks about having a lot of normal friends, and you can see why that would be. He's not obviously not going to come on and start talking about any other side that exists. And I'm sure that side does exist. The
Gardaí and the police in Spain and etc. believe that side exists. He's currently before the courts in Spain where they're investigating a sort of money laundering gang. He has said, and he spoke out at the airport when he arrived home, that he wasn't worried about that he was innocent. We have spoken to him at much greater depth about that. Very intriguing take from him on that. But he is suspected here by Gardaí of being a major organised criminal figure. And he's suspected of being the head of the Hutch organised crime group. He would, and always has, disputed that and says he is a sort of a family patriarch, a head of a family, but not of a crime gang. He doesn't agree that he is. The Guardian nonetheless suspect that, and that's all sort of washing around Gerry Hutch. But for many people, and particularly we're going to come on to it, the politicians who've already voiced their concerns about Gerry Hutch going for election, and he's going for election. He's going. I mean, we watched as he went in and signed himself up and got his papers in order. But he's creating a stir. This interview over the 3 parts will create a stir. It will be of huge interest to, I think, there's very few people in the country who won't find this interesting. Yeah. It just is. And to have somebody like him with his life experiences, with what he's suspected of, the fact he's going for election, sitting here and giving up almost over 2 hours of his time to answer questions has been a great... It's been a fantastic thing for us. It's our business. It's what we do. And, I'm sure you feel hugely privileged as well to get the scoop, if we want to call it that, the journalistic scoop.
Now he has an interest. He has his own interest.
Of course he does.
In putting out. So
we're 30 years in the business. We're not naive. We aren't exactly sort of up on the last boat on the Liffey. No. We know what this is about. We totally understand the game, the political, the criminal, the journalistic game. We get it. But one way or another, to have him here for over 2 hours, to be answering questions and to be telling us firsthand what went on during those feuding years before them and in the aftermath has been just fascinating.
It is absolutely fascinating. And of course he has his agenda, but that's life. People have agendas at all times. And if you hear the politicians speaking about his candidacy, and again, they're absolutely entitled to express those opinions, they also have their agenda, and that comes through in what they say. So
let's start with Taoiseach Micheál Martin, and he was in, he was out and about canvassing obviously this week. I think he was in
these offices as well,
doing an
today.
interview with the Indo Daily, which is a podcast that's run through the stable here.
Yeah.
He said of Gerry Hutch that, and I'm actually reading from the Irish Sun newspaper. They were out with him and they did a lengthy interview with them. He initially said that he was sceptical. So initially he was sceptical of reports of the Monk's election bid because, And they quote him, maybe there were other agendas at foot in relation to it.
Yeah.
So I don't understand what that means. So this was prior to the confirmation when he gets his ballot. So he was sceptical of that because he thought there were other agendas at foot in relation to it.
Yeah.
I think we'd have to ask him to explain further what that means. Asked for his thoughts on the Monk running for election, the Fianna Fáil leader said, people are entitled to run, but I think it would be a very retrograde step. I think we need full transparency from Mr. Hutch in terms of putting all his cards on the table. It's alleged about his life and his involvement. Those are the allegations we're all reading about in newspapers and so forth. And he has been before the courts. He needs to be fully transparent.
Yeah.
So he has been before the courts and he's been found, in particular last year, not guilty of murder in a case that, caused a lot of controversy that it was taken in the first place by the DPP. And we do speak to himself in relation to this. But in general, it caused a lot of controversy that the case was taken, the expense of it, the fact that the judgment, Justice Tara Burns, simply put to the state that they didn't have the evidence, that they did not have the evidence for the charge they put him forward on, which was murder.
Look, I mean, that's exactly true. I mean, it's more open than many. I mean, there's probably, I don't know the exact number of people who are likely to ultimately stand for election. It'd be, I don't know if it would hit 1,000. I know for a fact over all of those candidates, there are some that are actively facing charges. There's going to be, I know many of them that are suspected of crimes. There's reports this week about unnamed election candidates being arrested. There's no doubt about it that the transparency is not universal.
Yeah.
However, it's also a fair opinion. I mean, I think there is. This is what it comes down to with Gerry Hutch's election bid. Is a person of his background and moral stance, are they entitled to be elected? And ultimately, the voters decide that.
And the Constitution says
the Constitution says he's entitled to. Now, if you look, there's been many people in the Dáil, both past and present, who've been convicted of criminal offences, some very small, some driving offences, some of a more major nature, many people that have been through tribunals, etc., have had findings against them as a matter of fact by the courts. It hasn't ended their political careers. All it has been is that those findings are there, and then the public get a chance to vote for them. And in many cases, the public have continued to vote for them. And let's be realistic, some of them have been excommunicated by their parties over the years, and some of them have not been.
And I think Hutch would say his cards are on the table. I mean, he would say that, his convictions are laid bare, they're there. Any arrests or suspicions around him, he certainly hadn't shied away from talking about things like that. He is probably more transparent, he would say, than many other people going forward. And also, if he does get elected, he has agreed to, do everything a TD is expected to do, including, don't they have to list their assets?
They'd have to list their property holdings and assets.
Yeah. So,
however, the other matter is, he certainly has been found not guilty of murder and is beyond suspicion of that as a result. The other matter, I suppose, is there a shadowy organisation in the background that he's a part of, and how should the public feel about that? Ultimately, as you said, the Constitution gives you the right to stand for election no matter what your circumstances. And therefore, it is ultimately a matter for the people in his constituency who will they're certainly going to be informed of it because it's in the papers all the time. The Taoiseach there is commenting on it. It's not going to be a mystery to the people.
I will say for Micheál Martin, and we saw his interview with our colleagues in the Indo-Daily, and the big question put to him was, has he ever smoked a spliff? And he said no.
Yeah.
And it's like, you nearly feel sorry for him.
Well, I mean,
he hasn't even smoked a spliff
you fully believe him.
You fully believe him, yeah, absolutely.
Hasn't, so.
And he says himself, I was a little bit square. And so anyway, look, so Micheál Martin I would say you never know with people, but I mean, he comes across, appears, there's no suggestion that he's nothing but clean as a whistle.
Look,
So maybe
absolutely.
Micheál Martin, you know, of all people to come out with this, has a place to say, you know, he wants full transparency from the likes of Mr. Hutch. Now, on the other side of the playing field, we have Mary Lou McDonald, and you handle this because her comments, I think, you know, when you talk about a little bit of hypocrisy, we do have to look to Sinn Fein and to the comments of Mary Lou McDonald in a different way slightly.
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, look, Mary Lou McDonald as an individual has obviously never been suspected of any involvement in anything criminal. However, the same can't be said for the Provisional IRA. We all accept that Sinn Féin and the Provisional IRA are inextricably linked, is the term that's always used. So Mary Lou says about Gerry Hutch, I absolutely condemn him. I am on record. In fact, there's nobody more on record than I in condemning that. I represent the communities that suffer because of so-called gangland warfare, she said. I represent communities that have suffered the ravages of the heroin epidemic from the 1980s and all of the chapters thereafter. I roundly condemn Gerry Hutch or anyone who is involved in crime, in particular those who bring the misery and heartache of drug addiction, drug enslavement, drug debt, and all of the violence that stems from that. So that's what she says. But the Provisional IRA and Gerry Hutch have also been linked, I suppose. Gerry Hutch is obviously the key suspect, and you know, really, the Gardaí believe and have said so in court that he organised two of the biggest armed robberies in the history of the state in the late 80s and the early 90s. But, you know, beyond that, I mean, the biggest armed robbers in the state through the 70s and the 80s and beyond were the Provisional IRA. I mean, I was just looking back on this, because remember, Gerry Hutch was mentored as an armed robber, it is claimed.
By Eamon Kelly.
By Eamon Kelly, who was obviously linked to the official IRA. But if you look back in 1975, the IRA formally decided to become involved in armed robberies. They had some sort of army council, it's all secret, and decided that they needed to raise funds, and this was the way. This is the way it was. One of the first ones in 1976, they robbed a Cork to Dublin train of 200,000. But by the late 1970s, when Gerry Hutch was also coming out of prison and becoming involved, it is alleged.
He's a young man. He's
becoming involved. It is alleged in major organised crime. There was, I think it said, in 237 robberies and armed robberies in 1978 and 250 in 1979, when 2.5 million was taken. And it is estimated that the Provisional IRA carried out half of them. Now, through the 80s then, the IRA were just involved in normal organised crime, let's put it that way. I mean, the kidnappings of Ben Dunn and Don Tidy will particularly stand out. I mean, they were IRA operations. Those men were held and they were looking for a ransom. I mean, particularly violent and traumatic crimes that were committed. So what happened through the 80s then was the IRA started to look at some of these armed robberies and believe that they were, in particular the kidnappings, which caused absolute outrage at the time, that these operations, while financially worthwhile, were causing a bit too much bad publicity in the South. So what they started to do was to sort of sponsor or bank robbers, really. People of the likes of Gerry Hutch's associates, where they would provide them with information and weapons, and the robberies would be carried out, and, you know, they would get a cut. I mean, they also were routinely involved in, you know, regular organised crime. They got a cut
from lots of things, cigarette smuggling and various other things
smuggling,
like that.
Exactly. I mean, in particular, like, you know, obviously Slab Murphy is, you know, is one of the people that is also claimed. So, I mean, these things are it's hard to view them as different. I mean, right up to 2004, obviously the Northern Bank raid, which was
26.5 million stolen from the headquarters of the Northern Bank on Donegal Square West in Belfast.
Yeah.
Some of it recovered, most of it not.
I mean, carried
always said to have gone into the pension fund of the Provos.
Yeah, I mean, carried out by the IRA. I mean, that's simply not up for dispute. It wasn't one of those sponsored jobs. I mean, in the middle of all of that, remember, the Provisional IRA were playing a role in gangland murders. I mean, the murder of Martin Cahill, probably the most famous in 1994, when at the same year, I think that Gerry Hutch is alleged to have carried out one of his major armed raids.
It would also be sort of generally accepted that the Provisional IRA led the way and led that sort of march into organised crime that developed in this state, that a lot of the sort of the criminals followed them into
well,
that.
They were mentored into it.
Yeah.
I mean, and also then in the aftermath, as the property boom started to occur in Ireland, a lot of the organised criminals in Ireland, including people like Jim Mansfield Sr., were laundering money for criminals, but also for Provisional IRA figures in the
and
South.
the INLA, yeah.
So they were absolutely interwoven.
Totally.
And Gerry Hutch's, even up into the Regency, you have a lot of ex-provos mentioned during that trial, including people like Pierce McCauley. So...
And I suppose back to Mary Lou and her comments, I mean, she is the one that has been the subject of, debate around Gerry Hutch's bid for election because, the Sinn Féin vote has
come under pressure.
She has come under pressure. She's not expected to do anywhere near as well as she did the last time. And there's been a lot of speculation and talk about, it'd be her votes really that Gerry Hutch might be able to clean up a little bit from. So, it's personal with her as well as...
Well, I mean, I would say it's possibly not personal, but it's political.
It's personal within the constituency because she's going for election within the same constituency.
Exactly.
There's 4 seats to be had.
There's 4
Gary
seats.
Gannon, hers, Pascal Donoghue, and who was the fourth?
Nasa Horgan.
Nasa Horgan. We're all in seats. And as Hutch has said, nobody's in a seat at the moment. Each seat is up for grabs, and the comments he made coming through the airport were that any seat would do him. He wasn't particularly targeting any one person's seat. But so Mary Lou MacDonald is coming at this maybe twofold, that her vote will be under pressure, plus she's criticising the idea that somebody with a history of some criminality is going for election, and she finds that abhorrent.
I mean, I think she's... That's a fair perspective, and she's sincere, and all of that. But I suppose if you look at what Sinn Féin have the transformation they've undergone, there's no doubt of their origins in connection with the Provisional IRA. And personally, I wouldn't be somebody that says you could never vote for Sinn Féin because of what they did in the 80s. They've gone through a transformation, been a part of a peace process. It's brought so much benefits to this island. They've so many young people joined the party who have no connection or history with any of that. But we allow them to become an acceptable moral force. Is that right being given to Gerry Hutch? Or should it be given? Well, I mean,
or should people in glass houses not throw stones?
Well, I mean, I'm not saying it should be, by the way. I'm just saying that is the question that's being posed. Gerry Hutch has a past. Does he have a present is a big question. Or should any of that stuff...
But I mean, the Constitution clearly states that he's a right to go for election. So,
that,
people are entitled to have an opinion or whatever, but... Yes, he has a right. End of. I mean, there's no question. That's a black and white thing because it says it in the Constitution.
So he has a right to stand for election 100%. Does he have a moral right to ask to receive your vote? Do Sinn Féin have a moral right to receive your vote? I mean, some people would say they don't. Austin Stack, for example, whose father was killed, publicly came out, I think, this week, saying they don't have a right. I don't automatically agree with that, but I'm not sure that they are in a position to pass that judgment on Gerry Hutch, and maybe they feel they are. They obviously do feel they are.
Well, they haven't as a party. She has done as an individual politician, albeit the leader of the party.
Yeah, but I mean, true.
Anyway, let's move on to Simon Harris.
Okay.
So he says that Gerry Hutch should not be treated like a quote minor celebrity. He said that. asked about Mr. Hutch's election bid while canvassing on Capel Street in the Dublin Central constituency. The Fine Gael leader said, "I think it's important that we don't treat this individual like some sort of minor celebrity. This is the person who's brought misery and criminality to this capital city. He's not a celebrity, he's a criminal." Strong words from Simon Harris.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, let's start with the bit about, because there's two major bits in that statement, really. And the first bit is about him becoming a minor celebrity. I think that, we do have to accept that Gerry Hutch carries celebrity.
He does. He does. And I mean, he carries with this.
Whether you like that or not, and no matter what, he is box office.
Well, he certainly carries celebrity, and he's certainly a very famous person with a name recognition.
And you can't really control that.
No, I mean,
now he's saying he shouldn't be treated as that.
No, and that's a fair perspective.
That is a fair point.
Yeah, that is a fair perspective. He is a celebrity. He might say that with that celebrity comes a lot of negatives. It's a negative celebrity, I think. It's not all a positive celebrity. I mean, it's a fair point, I suppose. Simon Harris again is somebody that probably, like Niall Martin, never smoked a joint in his life, I would say. I don't know if he's ever said he had, but I'm certainly not libeling him by saying
I'd say he hasn't broken a law.
No. So, I mean, he is coming from a totally different perspective. The issue is, right, that when we put up the stories about Gerry Hutch, and this is true for all newspapers, all of a sudden, if you put them up on Facebook, you get all these comments, and you could predict them. You could nearly write them themselves. And the main one is, they are worse gangsters in the Dail.
Always.
Okay?
Always,
so that is, you always get that.
Yeah.
Now, what does that mean? And do people really believe it? Like Simon Harris doesn't believe that. And I personally don't necessarily accept that either. These are generally hardworking, honest people. But there is a big section of people in this society that believe that the political system is weighed against them. And there is maybe an elite, or there's a group of people that, they automatically benefit from the political structures we have. So when they say gangsters, they're not accusing them of being drug dealers or something like that. But they're talking about things like, where government contracts are given out and people get excessive money, or, where there's a wink and a nod, and all of this, which has been part of our political culture over time. So there's a lot of people, whether that's true or not, believe it. And they look at Gerry Hutch and don't see a perfect moral individual, I believe. What they see is somebody that's morally equivalent to somebody that's in a political party. And that's the...
I think you get those comments because I think the fact of the matter is that people who are in significant roles, in high office, shall we say, when they do wrong, the damage they do lasts way longer than even the memory of them. A lot of damage was done in politics in, 20 odd years ago? Corruption, backhanders, all those things happened. And that legacy of those bad apples, if you want to call them, has just lived on. And the same can be said in the Gardaí when you have, the wrong people in the wrong position of power and something happens. This comes to light. The entire force is painted, in the public perception in a certain way. The same happens in journalism, in our job, when you have people who do the job badly or wrongly or whatever. The whole industry suffers from it, and suffers for years, decades.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, I do think there's another even deeper bit, that even when people believe politicians are operating 100% within the law, they believe it's still not fair. That if you are wealthy and have access to money and influence, that you're going to do well in life. And if you don't, you're not. And I think that is also underlying it. It's not even the people who operate outside the law, which there have been over the years, as you said, and they do huge damage. People believe, and they probably wouldn't describe it like this, that there's a systemic unfairness. And I mean, you can see that's reflected in some of the things that happen in society, where you've great poverty in corners and great wealth in other corners. And those people don't get what they deserve, either side, possibly. So there is that. Now, I don't necessarily agree with it, but I think that is a perspective that's out there. Obviously, if you have government contracts being given out, for example, and there's dodginess going around, nobody's going to get their legs broken or shot dead. So there is a more brutal world out there.
But what I was actually going to say was that while that happens in legitimate society, in high office, when you have bad things happening, bad management, people in jobs where they shouldn't be and who are corrupting, whatever, it actually goes completely the other way when you come into crime.
Yeah.
The business of crime. Because actually, within criminality, what happens is if someone's half okay, they're risen to a stature that they are absolutely fantastic. So do you know what I mean? The levels are sort of all upside down. So in criminality, if you have somebody coming out of organised crime and they're okay, they're not going around killing people.
Yeah.
They might be going around doing armed robberies, feathering their own nest and maybe a bit of drug dealing or whatever, but they're not the worst. So if you're not the worst in criminality, you're elevated to a position that you're seen as kind of a really okay person.
Yeah, and I think that can only happen in a society where people have such a distrust of their own state and such a disengagement with their own state that people can be seen okay. Because
is that not the way the world is nowadays?
No, that is the way the world is nowadays.
Yeah.
But that is not the way the world always was. In our parents' generation, people didn't feel like that. Now, people in the north did feel like that about the provisional IRA, for example, where in the south they were very, very generally looked as being absolutely immoral. In the north, people said no, or in certain communities at certain times, they said no, these are a moral force and it's the state that's bad. Now, I think we're getting kind of highfalutin, I suppose, but I think that there's some of that attitude towards the state has become, across the Western world, has become really deeply embedded in society. And therefore you see different types of characters popping up in elections all over the place, like Donald Trump.
Now, we're going to leave the final word maybe on this to Paschal Donoghue. These remarks were made earlier this month before it had been confirmed, when obviously speculation was ongoing about whether he would, and where Micheál Martin thought something else might have been at play in regard to reports around Gerry Hutch's possible election candidature. Paschal Donoghue at that point said that he believed some people might vote for Gerry the Monk Hutch if he did decide to run in the upcoming general election. And he said it was up to Hutch if he wants to run, so him understanding the constitutional rights there. But he added that he would make a case against organised crime and drugs. So he said that his area, Dublin Central, where Hutch will be running, suffered from trauma and loss of life as a result of crime in the area. It's fair to say that it was many relatives of Gerry Hutch that were the ones who suffered loss of life in recent times in that area. But he said that I'll be making the case for the great dangers of organised crime, for the harm that drugs have done to the communities that I represent, that I'm lucky to represent in the Dail. I'll be making the case for putting those dark moments behind us, he says, for supporting the guards, for supporting communities that have been so grievously hurt by this crime, and making the case for supporting communities in combating this kind of harm.
Again, you have to welcome that. I mean, that would be a good thing.
Yeah. So organised crime is on his agenda if he gets re-elected.
Well, that's what he
that's
said
what he
there.
says.
But he's also saying there about people that have been the victims of drug addiction. I can tell you, the Fine Gael government the current coalition government are not pumping in loads of money helping people who are suffering from addiction. So is it all words? Paschal Donoghue seems a very sincere guy, but if they want to pump loads of money into drug addiction services, I mean, we have such a scarcity of beds for people who want to get clean and get off drugs. I mean, talk to anybody who's in that position. The idea that they can even get help without being on this massive waiting list, so you have to back it up.
And also, I think just to say, because I think it's incredible when I see people connecting the two things in a one sentence. Organised crime and drug addiction are two completely different things. They couldn't be further apart. Drug addiction is a healthcare issue. Organised crime is not a healthcare issue at all. It is a criminal issue. It's around economics and it's around various other elements of society, but it is nothing to do with healthcare. Drug addiction is purely 100% a healthcare and a care approach.
Yeah. What do you think? Why do you think people are interested in reading about crime?
In reading about crime and listening to crime and watching crime, I think it's pretty fascinating. I think we find these people, you've said before, the likes of Gerry Hutch, he's not an accountant, is he? He does have quite an interesting life. We find their lives interesting, slightly exciting. We're glad maybe they're not our lives, or we haven't had to deal with some of the stuff that goes with them.
Do you know what I think? I think it's because people listen and they're considering what's right and what's wrong. They're making moral judgments as they hear all of these tales. What would I, because some of the examples are so extreme, it's all about this sense of morality. Who's good and is that bad, and
am I more moralistic?
Well, it's a moral thing that people have, and I think that when they listen or engage with crime stories, they bring that into play, and that's the interesting bit about Gerry Hutch's election. It's how do people judge his morality?
Yeah, and to judge that, you do have to look all the way back, don't you?
You
Into somebody.
You do, and that's
you have to see what makes them to understand them. It's easy to sit there with, if you have a well-paid job, you have a home, you have all those things that go with middle classism, to judge on the basis of you. Would you behave like that? Would you do that? No, probably because you never needed to. You never would need to.
That is why he's interesting, because he's a complex character. So people. But that is what it comes down to. And that is what all of those politicians there, they're not really making the case of what he did or didn't do, or he should or shouldn't run. They're really saying, this is the moral stance we're taking. Now, Gerry Hutch spoke to us and he's told us his moral stance. Now, people can agree with any of those moral stances. And it's interesting to see, is there enough people that find Gerry Hutch more moral than another politician in his constituency.
Or more real or whatever.
Well, I think, but I think it's the morality of it that, he has done these things, but that's a part of his overall life and circumstances.
It is, but to comprehend where people are coming from morally, you have to comprehend where they've come from and what has made them.
Exactly.
What has shaped them, moulded them, and what they, their experience in life.
Exactly, but also, people like Pascal Donoghue, do people buy into his moral vision? Because obviously there'll be a lot of people in that constituency who won't vote for Pascal because they don't. So that's what it's all about. And that's the other thing about Sinn Féin as well. They have a past and they come into, and people judge that.
Yeah.
So that's what I think it's all about. And it's fascinating. And,
But look, I would just say to anybody listening to this and, tune in, share, watch, learn, engage with this and come out of it. And I hope you can do that. I hope we haven't, I hope we have done a really good job as interviewers, that we have brought the story out of this person, that we have sat back and we have let Gerry Hutch tell his own story, and we facilitated that through hopefully making him feel comfortable enough in this environment that he can do that and can share it. But I would urge people to listen and to...
Then you can come to your own moral judgment, not just about Gerry Hutch, but about us.
About
us.
Yeah.
Nicola Talent in particular, because she's the boss. So I was only doing what I was told.
So look, we'll be back and we're going to hit the big red button on Sunday morning for the first part of this interview. And Monday and Tuesday we'll run parts 2 and 3.
Yeah.
All 3 are fascinating.
I think so. I think so.
They don't degrade in interest as they go along. They're just 3 different sort of areas to discuss. So anyway, let's do this and see where it goes and how it goes. Thanks, Niall.
Thanks, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Talent, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs, and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.